All right, kids, today we are going to review the 1450 to 1648 time period, and I have made some things for you to look at on my Google Classroom website. So if you go to the classwork tab, it says review topics, predictions for DBQ. So I have made 3 Google documents, one for each of the time periods, and I am going to go through the 1450 to 1648 one right now in a second. Let me get Connor in there. All right. So let's go back and look at this. So what I have made here is really just a prediction of what I think a topic that might be on the test would be. There is no guarantees that this is what it is. Obviously, right, I just kind of looked at the course description for the time periods and said, if I was going to make a DBQ, what topics are fruitful? And for each of the topics that I listed, I tried to cover some of the context that you would talk about in your intro, and then I just sort of thought of some key historical facts or figures that you might see in the documents. And then I tried to think like, hey, what would a good prompt look like? What would the topic of the essay be? So the first one for the 1450 to 1648 time period is the Commercial Revolution. All right, so let's talk Commercial Revolution. Let me unmute you guys. When I say Commercial Revolution, what do you think of? All right, Joey, go ahead, since I can see your face. I say Commercial Revolution. What is that? What's an idea that pops into your head?
I want to say something like, like urbanization, commercialization, industrialization.
Stop there. It's not industrialization, but it is urbanization. What was the second ization you said?
I said commercialization.
Yes, it is a growing commercial economy that is happening in Europe. We are seeing movements away from traditional village life to urban life that is basically caused by the increased trade that Europeans find themselves engaging in after the age of exploration, right? So the Commercial Revolution is a consequence, is an effect of the age of exploration that is taking effect there. So let's look at that document again. And as you can see, my context is European desire for Asian luxuries led to the initial rounds of exploration that we saw. Let me do some here. Boop. All right. Let me go back to that. Sorry about that. Led to the initial exploration that we see happening. The 3 Gs, God, Gold, and Glory, you could talk about as well. That led to exploration, which led to the colonization of the Americas, as well as increased trade with Africa and Asia. So that's sort of the context for documents that you see about the Commercial Revolution. Now, a thing about the Commercial Revolution is that it is going to start in this time period, but it also extends into the next time period as well. So you might see documents from the 1500s all the way to the 1700s crossing time periods, because this is going to be a long-term economic change that we see, right? And some historical facts, figures, the Dutch Golden Age, which is going to take place in the 1600s, and you are going to see the Dutch are going to build a huge navy, a merchant marine. They are going to have the fastest and best ships. They are going to dominate the trade, especially in the Spice Islands. They're really going to focus on trade in the Indian Ocean. You might see artwork for the one picture. If it was the Dutch Golden Age, it might be something by Rembrandt. Lots of scenes of daily life, of urban life, of ships in port cities are features of Dutch Golden Age art. Still life was as well, because it was a way for artists to show off their artistic techniques. Maybe there'll be documents about the slave trade. That is a part of the Commercial Revolution. A lot of the cash crops that are produced in the Americas are, produced by slave labor. The creation of trading companies and the issuing of royal charters to those trading companies to pursue trade. joint stock, more capitalist sort of pursuits. And then, there is a bit of a religious backlash against all this economic activity. Is it godly to do such things and stuff like that? Can anyone think of anything else associated with the commercial revolution, or do you remember the commercial revolution? It's not one of the topics we talk about all that much just because we cover it in world history and things like that. So any questions about that particular topic? No? So the reason why I picked this one, I think it is, it's got lots of different topics you could talk about. It stretches across a large time period. It is going to be things that happen across centuries, and you could talk about political, social, economic effects. It's going to be big and broad, which Anas said that's what the Gov one was like. I didn't pick topics like the Renaissance because the Renaissance seems too constrained. I don't know how you do a DBQ about the Renaissance. That seems more like a short answer question or a topic for a multiple choice question. The commercial revolution is big, broad, and so that was my thought process in putting it number one for this particular. All right, so let's go, hold on a second. Let us go back to that document, and then let's look at some ideas that we might have for essays. So the effects of the commercial revolution: greater capitalism, right? More capitalistic practices, a greater focus on private property in European society. Growing urbanization is certainly going to take place. During the 1500 to 1750 time period, the largest growth in cities are going to take place in either capital cities, which is a consequence of growing monarchical power, not really relevant to this, or in port cities, which is relevant to this because the port cities are growing because of the influx of trade of Asian luxuries, of American cash crops, and other raw materials and stuff like that. Consumerism, this idea that your life is measured by the amount of stuff that you have. There's more availability of things, and so people who can afford to have nicer things are going to have nicer things. There is a problem with this, though. Population is growing, and prices are rising because there's increased demand for goods, but wages are kind of staying steady and are stagnant, and so that is a bit of a problem. We're going to see growth of commercial elites. Merchants are going to carve out bigger roles, more important roles. The bourgeoisie begin to form into existence. And then the lower classes are not always going to benefit from this. They're going to be exposed to capitalist pressures, and they're not always going to be able to stay afloat. We see this in that poverty DBQ that we did, right? One of the consequences of a growing commercial economy is that you have urbanization, but not everybody is able to enjoy the fruits of labor, and you have, visible poverty and things like that going on. All right, so that is the commercial revolution. We all good on that? Joey, give me a thumbs up if we're all good. Bree? PC? If you three don't have any questions, I'll move on because everyone else hides themselves from the video. All right, so let's move on. Okay, the second topic that I think could be ripe for a DBQ question is the Protestant Reformation. And again, this is going to stretch across about 150 years. Luther starts doing his thing in the 1517 is when he posts his 95 Theses. And then you have the 30 Years' War, which lasts until 1648. So you could say the dates of the Protestant Reformation are 1517 to 1648. However, I would argue that the Christian humanists who are going to have an influence on the Protestant reformers were, saying their things about the Catholic Church even earlier than that. So again, it's one of these broad topics that branches off into political, economic, and social sorts of categories. And so it gives you a wide variety of sources and things like that that you could talk about. Plus, this is a real big, obvious sort of thing, which I think the question will be this year. I don't think it's going to be a niche sort of thing. All right, so if you're writing an essay about the Protestant Reformation, your introductory paragraph, you want to talk about context, you could talk about the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance was a time period or a time in history where critical thinking was valued, where people were more skeptical about institutions of power. And so the Catholic Church's claims about there being the voice of God and the Pope being God's representative and their ability to do as they please won't be as readily accepted as it once was. Also, we have the printing press, which is making the Bible more available. People are beginning to read for themselves. One of the core tenets of the ideas of humanism is that you go to the original sources and read them yourselves. And so many people are going to begin to read the Bible. As they examine the Bible, they see that many things that the Catholic Church teaches and does is not in the Bible. And so they are going to question whether that is a valid expression of faith then. Also, the Roman Catholic Church in the medieval time period and in the early time period is, dominant. They are the only Christian faith. And so this allows them to gain lots of wealth and power, and they begin to express these with the creation of opulent and extravagant cathedrals and other expressions of power. The sort of absolute power that the church has leads to corruption, and it's from the top down. You have drunk, illiterate priests on the local level. You have popes that are waging war, flouting the rules that the church itself has created. And so, those are all things that you could talk about to establish context for a Protestant Reformation sort of thing. Facts and figures that you might see in the documents. Luther obviously is the starter of the Protestant Reformation within the German states. But another reason why I think this is a good topic is, the Protestant Reformation takes place in many different places, and it's led by many different people. It's not a uniform sort of movement. So that way you could work a comparative essay into this as well. And so we have Calvin and Zwingli, who are going to be much more influential in Switzerland, France, the Low Countries, which is, Belgium and the Netherlands, Great Britain. Obviously, Henry VIII is going to play a big role in the Reformation in England. You have the Peasant Rebellion in the German states. You have Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who attempts to stop the Reformation from spreading but fails. You have the religious conflicts that emerge, especially in the German states. The Peace of Augsburg attempts to create the idea that religious pluralism is a feature of society that is just going to become accepted. The 30 Years' War, the Treaty of Westphalia, which ends that, sort of supports this idea that we're never going to go back to religious uniformity. The Catholic Reformation in response to the losses to the Protestant Reformation is another thing that we see going on. And so essays that I thought you could form from this, obviously the effects of the Protestant Reformation is a big thing, right? Religious pluralism, which means different sects of Christianity that are going to coexist within society. But of course, this is going to create division and conflict within societies, and that leads to civil war in places like France. The 1500s, France is ravaged by religious wars and internal instability. There's a question, are these Protestant reformers expressing truly religious thoughts, or are they using it for their political gain? In France, only 10% of the population was Protestant, was Huguenot, but 90%, no, wait, that's not right. What's the fact? 10% of the population total, but half of them were of the noble group or something like that. A very large number of nobles were Protestant, and many people wondered, is this a way to oppose the monarchy, or is this, legit religious devotion? Continental wars are going to break out. Philip II launches wars against the Muslims in the Mediterranean. He launches wars against the Netherlands and the British, the Spanish Armada. The 30 Years' War is a great example of continental war. Maybe it's a comparative DDQ, and you look at policies of politiques, right? Monarchs who favor religious tolerance, for lack of a better word, over religious uniformity. Elizabeth I, Henry VIII are examples of monarchs like that. Or they try to impose religious uniformity like Philip II. Women are going to have additional opportunities from this as well. The Protestants don't take marriage as seriously as the Catholics. For the Catholics, it's a sacrament, right? For the Protestants, it's like, hey, God wants you to be fruitful and multiply. And if you don't like the one you're with, then, find someone you like. So they're going to be a little bit more chill when it comes to things like divorce, more opportunities for women maybe within the family. What else do we have here? Differences. So for a comparative, you could look at how the Reformation took hold in some places and how it didn't in others. Generally, there's a geographic bent to it. The closer you are to Rome and the headquarters of the Catholic Church, the less likely they were to stray. The further north you get, the more likely. If you look at the German states, southern German states stay Catholic, northern German states go Protestant. Also, monarchy was a big determinant of how successful the Reformation was. In places where strong monarchy exists, the Reformation really struggles to take hold. The Spanish Habsburgs are going to really clamp down in their territories, and we won't see it there. In other places, like the German states, where there is no strong centralized power, we see the Reformation run amok. And then Britain is a great example because their Reformation was actually led by the monarch, Henry VIII, looking to break away from the church and establish the Anglican Church. So maybe the Protestant Reformation is the topic we have from that particular one. And then the last one that we have is the rise of new monarchs. And again, I think that this one can tie into what we'll look at in the next time period, which is the age of absolutism. That doesn't happen during this time period, but we do see new monarchs emerge. And again, this is a continental-wide sort of thing, so we can get documents from multiple locations. There are differences in the practices of what the monarchs do, and so that's good. And so the context for this one is tough, because we have to go back to the Middle Ages, which is not really a time period that we talked about during this time. And so, the feudal monarchies that existed during the medieval time period were pretty weak, and the kings didn't really have the ability to control their domains without lots of help from the nobles. And the nobles set up societies where the king was in charge, but really the noble had a lot of autonomy within their province or region, or whatever you want to call it. The nobles were the ones who administered justice and collected the taxes and administered law. There weren't national laws. There weren't national judicial systems. There weren't bureaucracies that enforced and carried things out. It was really the noble in his kingdom within a kingdom is what we're seeing. But this starts to change as monarchs grow more powerful in the beginning of the time period that we're talking about here. And two things really help that happen. Number one, gunpowder weapons will be monopolized by kings. That will make knights no longer useful soldiers, and it will make castles less useful defense fortifications against the power of gunpowder. And the kings are going to be able to monopolize these weapons because of the second thing that's going on, which is the rise of urban commercial activity creates a new group of people, merchants, bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them, who are going to support the kings because the kings provide protection for private property, protection of business interests, and in exchange, those business elites pay taxes, which the kings use to buy armies that are loyal to them. Right? So the changing economic structure of Europe allows for more powerful monarchs to exist. It enables them to tax and raise revenue, which creates features and gives them an ability to project their power without relying on the nobility to do so. So, you know, famous kings that you could talk about at this time: Henry IV, Elizabeth I, Henry VIII. If you see those guys in there, it may be about their monarchical policies, but it also could be religion. Religion is going to play a factor in the rise of these new monarchies. They're going to have to decide, do we strive for national unity, meaning everyone is the same religion to ensure peace, or do we allow religious tolerance to get national unity, right? All four of these kings are going to have to deal with that sort of issue. They are also going to patronize arts and artists and philosophers. Bodine and Machiavelli are two writers who write strongly in favor of greater centralized power and supporting kings that we see during this time. And then just, you know, the centralization of power, like they're going to control the judicial branch. A good example of this is the Star Chamber. It was created in England basically because the King of England got tired of the nobles controlling the courts and always, you know, protecting noble interests in those courts. And so the Star Chamber was a court with a judge who got his position from the king, who was loyal to the king, and he would, you know, try nobles there who went against the king's laws. And so this was a way for kings to seize control of the judiciary. They are going to create a bureaucracy. Now, this is an interesting thing. Sometimes they guarantee positions to certain noble families that get to monopolize those positions. They get to have those things. But other times they go outside of the aristocracy and they use the new commercial elites to act as their representatives in the national bureaucracies that they are carrying. Now, the bureaucracy is going to allow for royal law and royal administration to take place on a national level. It allows them to control the far-flung regions of their kingdoms. The Edict of Nantes, that's the issue of religion or not. This is by Henry IV. He basically calls for limited religious tolerance, and then the creation of national law and stuff like that. So some questions that you could have from this, you know, obviously stronger centralized government, but you're also going to have wars within and without. The nobles are going to often resist attempts by the kings to take over, to leave them out of the power structures. An example of this is the Fronde, which probably is in the next time period, but, you know, the nobles rebelling against the policies of Cardinal Richelieu, scaring the young boy king Louis XIV. There will also be wars fought amongst these kings as they, you know, jostle for power and try and grow their kingdom. New elites are going to emerge. The bourgeoisie or the urban elite are going to play roles in these new administrations. The nobles are going to both resist but also accept, depending upon the privileges that they get. And what do we have here? Royal patronage, right? The creation of royal academies, the creation of great works of art that project the power of the state, like Versailles. Now, a lot of these things go into the next time period as well, and I think that that's also a useful thing for a DBQ. And then differences, well, you could look at how Great Britain, France, and Spain are the first places to really centralize, how they differ from the Holy Roman Empire and Italy, which are fragmented places, you know. All right, so that's the big three topics that I would guess. If it came from 1450 to 1648, it would be these. I think there's a chance that the DBQ could come from this time period. Number one, every class in America has covered this time period for sure, right? College Board wants to make sure that classes covered everything that's going to be on the test. Well, for sure, everyone did this in America. Schools weren't closed down in the first semester. You know, every AP Euro teacher is going to get through this particular time period for sure. Number two, typically DBQs don't come from before 1600. But when they modified the DBQ for this coronavirus edition, they moved the date back to 1450. Why'd they do that? Maybe they had an old one ready to go in case that became an issue. So it could come from this time period. I don't think it will. I think it's going to be the next time period where we're going to see it come from. But it could, right? Just because of those two reasons that I lay out. Now, here are topics that I just can't see a DBQ about. The Renaissance, I don't know how you do a Renaissance DBQ, right? If there's only one visual one, a lot of the Renaissance stuff is, the visual arts, although maybe there is a DBQ about humanism and the rise of the individual and like a changing focus on life and stuff like that. Maybe there's a compare the Italian Renaissance to the Northern Renaissance, but it didn't make the cut. I think the other topics are more fertile grounds for that. The actual exploration, not the effects of exploration, but like the causes of why places wanted to explore, I suppose you could make a DBQ about that. But again, that seems pretty narrow and not really that, it's a little too basic, I think. And then daily life. If there is going to be a daily life, I think it's going to be from the next time period, which is one of the topics that I have. The changing urban consumer life, sort of, we kind of talked about this in the commercial revolution. That's going to become even more clear in the next time period. But I don't think the daily life, like the village, communal celebrations, the saint days and stuff like that, I just don't see that being the foundation of what they're going to ask their DBQ about. But hey, you never know. They might. All right, so I just wanted to go through that today. I'll do the other two tomorrow. I figured we'd get more attendance tomorrow because I think this is the only AP test you seniors have. Any questions? I'm going to unmute you all now. Any questions about any of these topics?
Why did the Spanish Armada happen again?
Okay, so the Spanish Armada is a result of England going Protestant. Elizabeth I basically calms the religious turmoil in England by establishing the Anglican Church as the official state-sponsored church there. Now, she had a Catholic sister, Bloody Mary, who had been married to Philip II of Spain. Philip II tries to keep that going. He's a devout Catholic. When Elizabeth spurns the offer and goes Protestant, he launches the Armada to try and compel Britain by force to, return to the Catholic fold. And obviously, it doesn't work out. Any other questions about this time period? All right, so what's a good time to meet tomorrow for our meeting?
What time is the test?
The test is at 3 p.m., I believe. Is that right? Someone verify that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 p.m.
I feel like 11 is fine.
You like 11?
Yeah.
All right, we can do 11. All right, then I will send out a Zoom link. If we don't have any other questions about this at this moment, that's fine. We'll end the meeting. But if you want to email me, you can. I'm going to try and post this to Google Classroom. We'll see how it works.
Are you going to add the recording of the one you do tomorrow too?
I will add the ones if I can figure out how to do this one. But, I'm old, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but old people are terrible at everything. So we'll see how it works.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Good luck on your calculus tests for those of you who are taking it. I think the Pythagorean theorem is going to be the topic. That's my prediction. I have a very good rate. If it's not that, I think square roots. I got to laugh out of Joey. Okay, guys, I'll see you tomorrow.